right, so now we're talking about dependents, because dependents drive big tax benefits, such as filing status and a number of credits. To claim someone as a dependent, they must fall into one of two buckets, a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. But before you can even determine which test applies, every dependent must meet three universal rules. Number one, they cannot claim another taxpayer as their provider, meaning they can't be a dependent themselves. Number two, they generally cannot file a joint tax return unless it's only to claim a refund. And number three, they must be a U.S. citizen or resident. So once someone meets those three general rules, then we test whether they're qualifying as a child or qualifying as a relative. The exam loves putting dependents into the wrong category, so keep these buckets clear as we move on. All right, so as we mentioned, we have two different tests. So here's the big split. If someone qualifies as a dependent, they fall under one of two tests, qualifying child or qualifying relative. Each test has its own set of rules. So starting with the qualifying child test, to help this stick for the CPA exam, these are going to be your powerful mnemonics that you're going to remember. And thinking about qualifying child, we must remember that qualifying children must not act like narcs. All right, so NARCS stands for No Gross Income Test, the Age Test, the Residency.
What's going on? My name is Joey, and I'm the founder of Universal CPA Review. You're probably here because you're ready to pass the CPA exams once and for all so that you can advance in your career and move on with your life. Let me be the first to tell you that I've been there and I feel your pain. But I'm also here to tell you that the CPA exam doesn't have to feel like such a maze, and there is a path to a passing score. So what are you waiting for? Don't waste any more time. Commit to the process because it will pay off. In my opinion, I say let's knock out the CPA exams once and for all.
Test, the child relationship test, and the support test. And for qualifying relative, we're going to remember the mnemonic closer. Okay, so for a qualifying relative, they must be closer to you. That's going to include the citizen test, lives with taxpayer sometimes test, only limited income test, the support test, excludes joint return test, and the relationship test. All right, so a quick little memory trick before we continue. A qualifying child should be dependent, not independent, so no gross income requirement will be included. And a qualifying relative is someone you're supporting financially or who has a recognized relationship, but income and joint return rules matter much more. So now let's expand each rule so you know exactly where the tricky exceptions appear. All right, so starting off by going a little deeper into NARCS, starting with a qualifying child. What's the no gross income test? We don't look at how much money a qualifying child earns. They could have a job. That doesn't disqualify them. All right, so no gross income test is required. The age test. So they must be younger than 19 or 24 if they are a full-time student, or any age if they are permanently disabled. All right, so that's the one exception. The residency test. They must live with the taxpayer for more than half the year. All right, so when you think about temporary absences like school or medical care or military, they still count as living at home. All right, so another exception. The child relationship test. They must be your child. They could also be your stepchild, foster child, sibling, or descendant of one. Cousins do not qualify. All right, so support test. The child must not provide more than half of their own financial support. So anytime you're evaluating a child dependent, walk through the acronym NARCS. If one fails, they are not a qualifying child. All right, and then thinking about closer for qualifying relatives. All right, so this applies when someone is not a qualifying child. All right, so they haven't met the qualifying child test. We're now going to see if they're a qualifying relative. Starting with the citizens test, that's the C in closer. They must be a U.S. citizen. They could also be a U.S. resident or a resident of Mexico or Canada. They must live with the taxpayer. So they must live with the taxpayer for the full year unless they are a parent. Again, parents do not have to live in your home if you support their home. The O in closer, only limited income. All right, so the dependent's taxable income must be below the exemption threshold for the year. This is often tested, so be aware of it. And then we got the S, the support test. The taxpayer must pay more than 50% of the person's support. Then we got the E in closer, excludes joint return. So they cannot file jointly with a spouse unless solely to claim a refund. And finally, the R in closer, the relationship test. They must fit IRS qualifying relationships. Again, cousins and unrelated roommates don't qualify. So if someone is not a qualifying child, check each part of closer to see if they might still qualify as a dependent. Okay, so you might see a task-based simulation or multiple choice question where a taxpayer has multiple relationships and you need to go through each of them one by one to see if they are going to qualify as a dependent. Right, so a question might ask, how many dependents does Sarah or John or Shane have? And you need to understand each of the relationships and determine if they qualify. All right, so let's take a breath and summarize what we just learned. Because dependency rules are a huge CPA exam focus, everyone must first meet the 3 universal dependent rules. Then test them on if they are a qualifying child using the NARCS mnemonic. And if they fail NARCS, try qualifying relative using the closer mnemonic. All right, so a little shortcut. Once again, start with child first. It's usually easier to qualify under NARCS. If not, move on to closer. And remember, qualifying children unlock more tax benefits. Qualifying relatives have stricter income support rules. All right, so just keep practicing this. It's going to start to feel natural. If you go through the motions with step 1 through step 3 in your dependent mental map, you'll be good to go.